Well, Fauci has hinted that he might retire by the end of the Biden administration, or the end of Biden's first term, possibly only term. Of course, we have no idea. That was in an interview that he gave to Politico where he hinted at it. And it kind of sounds like he doesn't have a lot of stomach for the whatever kinds of reviews or hearings or oversight measures are going to be taken if and when Republicans are back in control of the government. And he said something like he thinks that it's perhaps less likely that they're going to be so interested in going after him if he is no longer in that role that he's been in for a million years.
Why not retire now then? Because it's likely that Republicans are going to take over Congress.
Right.
So that's when they're going to hold hearings. I mean, if Republicans get in control of the House, you can forget about all of these January 6 hearings that we're seeing right now and replace them, right, with COVID response hearings and probably
hearings.
Hunter Biden. Yeah, and maybe Hunter Biden. There's going to be a few others, but that would be, it seems like now would be the time to, I mean, really, honestly, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, how old is he now? He's 81 years old. So many years ago was the time to retire, but certainly I would say sooner than later.
I have to say, I can't get past the idea that for him, the retirement is not about any self-reflection on his part about the job that he's done. It's only about his professional standing. You know what I mean? Like, there's no part of him that's like, that initial lie about masks not being effective. I really want to take responsibility for that, right? Or well, we really did overdo it in this way or in that way, and I'm going to step down. It's only about his professional standing, which I think speaks so much to where the Democrats are at, who they're speaking to, and who their ranks are made up of, right? It's this careerism at the end of the day has replaced any kind of accountability, any kind of values in terms of judging whether you've done a good job or not.
Yeah, I mean, his whole thing was we're going to eventually get to herd immunity through vaccination. That was the Fauci promise. And so that's hinted at in this piece. Now he's kind of admitting that that's not going to happen. That he says in this interview that if I was going to be, because he said he was going to stay in power until the COVID-19 pandemic was over, and now he says, well, that I'd be 105 by then, because it's not ever, at least for the next quarter century, there's going to be some COVID. It's probably likely, or based on where the trajectory is right now, it's not going to be killing tons and tons of people. There's lots of ways to protect yourself. It's not a serious illness for most healthy or young people who get it now, but it's not going to be 0 cases or just a couple dozen cases. The way you have outbreaks of old diseases, but it doesn't take over the whole world. That's not the situation we're getting to, contrary to what he said. So many things he said over the course of the pandemic just turned out to be wrong or misleading. So I don't know. I think he actually should be kind of exiting in a cloud of negative sort of vibes. He was a very not a lot of good things I can say about this public figure, to be frank.
If I were the Democrats, I would actually be asking him to step aside now. I wouldn't want him to stick around as a Democratic Party until the end of Biden's term, because he's a liability at this point, right? Because of many of the things that you mentioned, Robbie. So
he's the guy Joe Biden too, though.
Well, sure, but I mean, if the Democrats hold on to Fauci, they risk having the optics that they're still, which may be true at this point still, that they're still very much holding on to these responses. I think that might be true just because of some of the rhetoric that is still coming out of the Democratic Party, calling people like myself who said the vaccines don't stop the spread, calling me still a conspiracy theorist. Well, which conspiracy was I peddling at that time? But because they continue down these narratives, smearing people, painting people, being very aggressive about the entire pandemic and blaming others when they were the ones that were calling for certain things, that were demanding mandates and certain things that did not work, that were unnecessary. So to hold on to Fauci, it's like propping up that response still, saying, no, we were right, you were wrong, when they were so obviously wrong. So he's a liability. I mean, like I said, unless they're still at that point in their mentality, if I were them, I would say we got to cut ties. We have to move on. This wasn't accurate. It wasn't correct. And now we need to move forward and show the American people that we're moving forward. But instead, they're holding on to this, and it will cost them voters.
Yeah, but the Democrats just don't understand, and maybe you can speak to this, Batya. I mean, there's so much self-sabotage in terms of messaging and just like good strategic thinking, right? They don't seem to get what like the mood of the country is on so many subjects. The Fauci is now this incredibly polarizing figure.
I think that they fear that because the pandemic response was so politically polarized for a while, that if they admit that they made any mistakes, people will think, oh, we can't trust them, they made mistakes, when the exact opposite is the case. If they had said from the beginning, listen, the scientific method means we're going to try things. Some are going to work, some are not. We're going to admit what we get wrong, and then we're going to learn from that and move forward, right? That if they had started like that, people would have forgiven them for their errors. But instead, every time something that they drummed home turned out to be false, for example, what you just brought up, Kim, the idea that people who are vaccinated can't transmit the disease, right? Which is false. But for so long, they were calling people grandma killers who said that, that they couldn't then just say, oh, actually, we got that wrong. You know what? You guys were right. Right. That's the sentence that they can't say. You guys got that right. And I think that that's such a moral failing. And, it really speaks to the death of expertise. I mean, Fauci really, really embodies like this figurehead saying, you remember when he said, I represent the science, which is like the most unscientific
I am the
sentence.
science.
Right. You could imagine in the English language, the death of expertise and the resurgence of, a populace that trusts each other more than they trust figureheads, because that is how the pandemic ended, because the American people said, we're done with this. The experts were still saying, wear the masks, do this, get 5, doses of the vaccine. And the American people said no. And they won, and they trusted each other to know when it was over.
And, on top of, look, to be fair, right, neither side will ever admit that they're wrong. We never hear I was wrong coming from Republicans or from Democrats. But the difference is and why I think some of the blame goes on Democrats when, they're a little bit more to blame or can be, they're more hypocritical about it, is because they're the ones that then say, they're part of their ethos is, no, we're following science.
Right.
We're the ones following truth, facts, science. And so when you say that, when you make those claims, and then you're unwilling to go and say, okay, we were, this was what the science now shows, and we were wrong, then you are a hypocrite. Republicans never really make themselves, they do make themselves in hypocrites in certain ways. Like we would see that era where, you'd have the good old family man Republican, and he's like, family values, and we want America to be all about, and then he's like cheating on the side, right? And we all catch him. So there's a hypocrisy there on the Republican side. But but everything else, they pretty much tell you flat out what they think and what they want. And then they don't go back on that. But Democrats will tell you something else to your face, do something else behind your back. And that is where they're rubbing so many, I think, many of us who voted Democrat, who always have supported Democrats, many of us now saying, forget it. I can't even respect the party. I just have so much, for me personally, I have so much contempt, and just I try not to, but I do.
Well, my issue with Republicans is that they often talk about doing things that I'd want them to do. They have this, they really fiery tweets, and then that's all it is. That's the entire agenda. Like is a Republican administration actually going to dismantle the CDC or reform the FDA or do any of these things, or are they just going to rant?
They do a lot of that. They do a lot of this. I mean, Republicans.
Oh, please, no, they do. They haven't shrunk government one iota in a billion years. They've never done they don't do a thing they say. They're all talk. They're all bluster. They're just to get you fired up. I have zero faith.
If you look at the most recent claims that Republicans said that they were going to do over the last, let's say, 8 years or so, you had Paul Ryan actually overhauled the tax system. That actually did happen. They promised that would happen, and it did happen. Same thing with Roe v. Wade. They promised it for decades, and it did happen. So Republicans
the Supreme Court doing. I'm talking about the federal. At the state level, Ron DeSantis has done things Republicans want, certainly in Florida. Just at the national level, I think whoever the presidential figure is and whoever the Congress is, they don't seem to. They don't reform the federal bureaucracy, which I think is
Donald Trump. Donald Trump got into office. He promised he would put in a bunch of pro-life judges. He did it. I mean, look. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that Republicans are doing, but I think when
they delivered on judges, they have never delivered on size of the bureaucracy. Size of the bureaucracy is just out of
Trump
control.
was trying to, he did a lot of eliminating. He kind of took a lot of the Reagan style. I mean, I think he did roll back and eliminate a lot of stuff. But I mean,
I wish he had. I don't think he
you're
did.
wanting him. Well, because your idea as a libertarian is to get rid of the entity entirely, right? So you're not talking about scaling it back.
TSA first, CDC next, FDA a shell of its former self. Then we'll talk. When Republicans do that, then I'll say, okay, mission accomplished. Great job.
No,
but they
I don't
never
want.
will.
I mean, I don't want them to do any of that of what you're asking for. I think a world with regulations
this is
necessary.
why you like Republicans more than I do.
Well, no, I don't know. Maybe as a libertarian, maybe you just hate everybody. I don't know.
I do.
Anybody wants any regulation.
Loathe entirely. All right. Well, we'll find out what's on your radar next, Kim. Stay tuned for that.